A big day in politics. And joining me now, CNN political commentator and Democratic strategist Dave Jacobson, California Republican National Committeeman Shawn Steel, CNN's legal analyst and civil rights attorney Areva Martin, and criminal defense attorney and former assistant U.S. attorney for Los Angeles, David Katz. Okay, Shawn, I'd like to start with you. But what about Hillary's missing emails and the server? No. Okay. Let's start with the statement.
Great question.
I thought you'd like it. Let's start with that statement from the president with regard to Manafort and the guilty verdict. You know, this is a witch hunt. This had nothing to do with how all the investigation was meant to start. It was meant to find Russians. And, you know, that's true. But you can ask the question as well, what did Monica Lewinsky have to do with, a botched real estate deal, Whitewater investigation?
Yeah. I think Paul Manafort had a really bad day. Probably may spend the rest of his life in jail, but he's a tax cheat. And there's not a whole lot of Republicans that are losing sleep or sympathy for Manafort. He's a campaign manager for the president for 4 months. He's had a sordid background, but these charges go back years and years before he worked for the president or even knew him. So it's a tax trial, but there's two big, huge stories today. One's kind of not important, the other one's huge. But Manafort, I don't think people people don't want to forgive people that are cheating on tax.
But if he was such a dodgy character, and Dave, this is to you, why was he hired by the Trump campaign in the first place? His reputation for propping up, oligarchs and being propped up by oligarchs and dealing with Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine was well known.
Yeah, I mean, look, the saying, you are who you surround yourself with.
You lay down with dog, you get fleas.
Yeah, right, precisely. It's like, okay, you have Michael Flynn, Donald Trump's national security advisor. You have Paul Manafort, who, by the way, I wouldn't minimize it. Sure, he served there for 5, 6, 7 months on the campaign, but he was the chief strategist that ultimately clinched the Republican nomination precisely, and ultimately propelled him to the general election, which then he, of course, won. So that was a game-changing position in the context of the political campaign. Look, the reality is, Bob Mueller is putting the squeeze on Paul Manafort, and now it's a question of whether or not he's going to flip. He's facing 80 years plus potentially in prison, and so the big question, he's got this other trial coming up in September, right, in the district court in Washington, D.C. The question is now, will he flip on the president?
And Areva, to you, with regards to what the president was saying about, this had nothing to do with, finding Russians who interfered in the election. If a crime is uncovered in the course of an investigation unrelated to the original allegation, that doesn't make it anything less of a crime, does it?
Absolutely not. And the prosecutors in this case did exactly what they were supposed to do, which is to refer the criminal activity that they observed over to the Southern District of New York so that the case could be prosecuted in the proper venue. I think what's so stunning about the president's statement, he's saying Paul Manafort is a good man. But what about our jury system? What about the rule of law? What about the man that said he would be the law and order president? He said nothing about the legitimacy of the jurors who spent hours and days deliberating over this very complex trial and came to a very, reasoned decision with respect to those 8 charges and deadlocked on 10. He didn't applaud them for their service to this country. He didn't, applaud the judicial system for working the way that it should in this country. He made this just really baseless kind of off-the-cuff statement about Paul Manafort being a good man. Paul Manafort is not a good man. Paul Manafort is a criminal, and the president needs to accept that, and so is Michael Cohen, and from what we've heard today, so is Donald Trump.
Well, back in April, the president was asked specifically about the hush money paid to the adult film star Stormy Daniels, who alleges she had an affair with Trump many years before he was president. Listen to his answer on Air Force One.
President, did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels?
No.
Why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no truth around the case?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's an attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael Cohen.
Do you know where he got the money to make that payment?
I don't know. No.
Well, we didn't actually end up having to ask Michael Cohen because he told the court what happened, at least in his version. He violated campaign law in coordination with and at the direction of a candidate for federal office, that candidate being Donald Trump. So, Shawn, it's hard to see what Cohen has to gain by making this admission. So it means basically the president appears to have been caught in a great big fat lie.
What I heard the president say is you have to talk to my attorney,
and the attorney said I did it in the direction of the president.
And I think the president's going to have to make better selections of attorneys. At least he certainly has learned that lesson. Michael Cohen, very little we understand about the guy, but he really seems like a classic sleazy New York attorney. I have to, you know.
He's known the president
and again, he's largely a tax cheat. He's cheated the feds out of millions of dollars. They got him on that. Then there's he wasn't in any way convicted or admitted to anything about Russian collusion. But what's interesting about this, several things. There's no trial. That's actually good. If we had a trial,
everything would come out.
It would have been a whole lot of it.
That would have been good.
Secondly, there's no deal. The deal is that he's going to spend 4 to 5 years in jail, no matter what, and not contested.
Okay.
So thirdly, he gets the most political partisan lawyer in America, and that's hard to say. Lanny Davis, who's Hillary Clinton's personal lawyer.
I want to bring David Katzer, because David, on that issue of whether or not Cohen can be forced to testify, whether there's a deal, whether there's immunity, can he be granted immunity by maybe Congress, by the special counsel, and then essentially be forced to tell what he knows in any kind of investigation or trial of the president, or basically go to jail?
Well, I don't think Michael Cohen is going to be granted immunity by Congress or by anyone else. They had this happen in Oliver North, and it ended up being a big mess in the Iran-Contra scandal back in the day. So I don't think that's going to happen. But the fact that Michael Cohen is going to get between about 4 and 5 years for the campaign violation, for the tax evasion, and also for lying to banks, that he's going to get 4 to 5 years for that doesn't mean he has to accept that as his ultimate fate. He can turn around tomorrow or any time after that and make a deal with the special prosecutor. And a lot of people think that's what he's going to do. And what he has to say is potentially very bad for the president, because he admitted today in court, in his factual basis, under oath, that what he did regarding Stormy Daniels and the former Playboy model, he did at the direction of the presidential candidate, meaning Trump. And he did it with the aim of helping Trump maintain his image during the election, which is the one of the elements for the campaign violation. In other words, Trump didn't do it so he wouldn't be embarrassed in front of his wife. So this was very damning today if Cohen ends up cooperating with Mueller, which I think is quite a possibility, if not a probability, going down the road.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to jail, 1 being he's going to, the president's okay here. What would you say is the president's, legal jeopardy at this point in time, given what Cohen has said in court?
I think his jeopardy is very great, and he can't even, Trump can't even fire Mueller, because this is all being done by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. And on top of that, Cohen also has state tax problems, so it's not even a remedy for Cohen in his fantasies to get a pardon. So I think that Cohen may end up being a bigger problem than Manafort is, because a lot of people think that after Election Day, if Manafort's a good soldier, he's going to get a pardon from Trump. That's what a lot of people think is going to happen here.
Okay. At that rally in West Virginia, just a few hours after the court decisions came out and went known, listen to the crowd. Dave Jacobson, I should say, that's obviously a reference to Hillary Clinton. It was the chant during the convention, lock her up. Ironically, it was led by, Michael Flynn, the disgraced national security advisor who pleaded guilty for lying to the FBI. But it seems that everything that happened in those 2 courtrooms had no meaning or resonance for those supporters of Donald Trump.
Look, the fact of the matter is, if you're going to go turn out to a Donald Trump rally, like you're a diehard supporter of the president, he's throwing red meat out there, and you're not going to flip on him. The question is, and what are the long-term political ramifications for the election that's 77 days from now? And the big question is those independent swing voters, right? And particularly in a lot of those states that Hillary Clinton won, those, top of the ballot, but potentially in those down-ballot races where Republicans are still in those House seats, right? That's the long-term domino effect that could impact this 77 days from now. The bottom line is Donald Trump campaigned on a brand that Hillary Clinton was crooked. And what did we find out today? This gut punch that wasn't even a gut punch, it was a body blow to Donald Trump, because he was injected into that court case with Michael Flynn, underscores the fact that he violated campaign finance law, right? And the bottom line is, he's the crook, he's the criminal, and I think we're going to increasingly see that when Michael Cohen starts to coordinate with the Mueller investigation. Yeah,
it's interesting you talk about how this was a central theme of the Trump campaign, that Hillary was the crook, that that it was the Clintons who were the dirty ones with their snouts in the trough. And it sort of began, back in 2015, I guess, Michael Cohen, he tweeted this out. Hillary Clinton, when you go to prison for defrauding America and perjury, your room and board will be free. Oh, Sean, there's a tweet for everything. I mean, the irony. I mean, come on.
No, it's delicious irony, but it's ultimately it's for about 5% of the people. It's really a political paradise for the political junkies. Most Americans don't care about that. Political campaign finance, tax fraud. It kind of runs over the minds of most of the people. They're not interested in that. But no, you can beg all you want. But here's what we'll do. You know what Americans care about today this very minute? Molly Tibbetts and her murder in Iowa. That's what 90% of people focus on. And I'll tell you, I'm going to give you another stat. This is another stat is that 80% of people still don't know who Manafort is. 90% don't know who Cohen is. And that's not going to change between now and Election Day. But here's the other problem Democrats have. There's no way that the president's going to be charged by the Justice Department because it's in their guidelines. You never charge or indict a sitting president. It's in the guidelines. We all know that. The lawyers will tell you that. What you can do is impeach him. And Americans do not want their president impeached. And the Democrats will lose House seats if they appear to want to talk about impeachment. I guarantee you this brilliant strategist here is telling his congressional clients, don't mention impeachment.
And Dave, just respond to that because, when Clinton was impeached, it did cost the Republicans.
Look, I think bottom line, if you look at public opinion today, 538 is out with fresh polling that shows the Democrats have an 8-point advantage in terms of the generic ballot. So I think you're wrong in that sense that Americans are paying attention.
3% last week. It's
30% of the country, 30% of those polled now believe the country is heading in the right direction, which is way down from what it was.
Right. And you've got a president who's got historical lows in terms of disapproval rating. The bottom line is that generic ballot, Sean, pardon me, the generic ballot this close to the election is meaningful. It is going to have an impact. That's why you see races like Connor Lamb and you see Doug Jones beating out Roy Moore. The fact of the matter is Democrats have momentum. They have
2 out of 10. You lost 8.
These are all Republican ballot seats, right?
Okay, let's go back to Donald Trump at that rally because, he didn't mention Manafort. He didn't mention Cohen at all. But he did actually talk. He could not resist talking about, the Russia investigation and taunting the special counsel, Robert Mueller.
Fake news and the Russian witch hunt. We got a whole big combination. Where is the collusion? They're still looking for collusion. Where is the collusion? Find some collusion. We want to find the collusion.
Areva, it seems they found, lots of examples of collusion or conspiracy, if you want to use the legal term for it. And this investigation, these proceedings are, they're really, midway through.
Yeah, John, one thing that's just so stunning to me is listening to Sean and other Republicans throughout the day try to defend the president and deflect from the seriousness of what we saw happen today. We saw the campaign manager for the president of the United States get convicted on 8 felony counts. We saw the president's personal lawyer walk into a federal court and admit that the president of the United States, then the candidate, directed him to engage in criminal conduct. No one is talking about what that does in terms of debasing the presidency of the United States. And Republicans are willing to go to such great lengths and engage in such hypocrisy with respect to this president, and no one is willing to hold him accountable. So where's the collusion? The collusion is when Michael Cohen said the president directed him to pay hush money to silence 2 women so that their stories would not be injected into the presidential campaign. And the irony of that is Donald Trump is so worried about protecting the legitimacy of his presidency. Well, today we now know that but for his criminal activity, he probably would not have won the presidency and he wouldn't be sitting in the White House today had he not engaged in that criminal conduct.
Oh, okay. Well, back in June, when Cohen, his personal lawyers, seemed to sort of be moving away from the president towards cutting a deal with prosecutors. The president was specifically asked if he had any concerns about Michael Cohen and if he could flip. Listen to this.
I haven't spoken to Michael in a long time.
Is he still your lawyer?
No, he's not my lawyer, but anymore.
Your personal lawyer, and not
but I always liked Michael.
Are you?
And he's a good person.
Are you
and I think he's been. Excuse me. Do you mind if I talk?
I just want to know if you're
asking me a question. I'm trying to ask.
Just want to know if you're worried if he's going to cooperate with federal investigators.
No, I'm not worried because I did nothing wrong.
David, you mentioned earlier that out of the 2 cases, Manafort and Cohen, it's Cohen which presents the most jeopardy for the president, at least in the long term. So, given what we now know, how worried should Donald Trump be at this point?
Well, I think Manafort could present quite a problem for the president. He was the only non-family member who was at that meeting at Trump Tower where the person came, according to Trump Jr., and sent the email that this person had come from Russia with information from the Russian government with dirt on Hillary Clinton. So I believe Manafort could create quite a problem, but I do believe that after Election Day, he's going to be pardoned. And then the question is going to be, what are the Republicans going to do? Are they going to have a profile in courage and say, you know what, we are not going to allow these pardons. These pardons are an obstruction of justice. But regarding Cohn, there's no way that Cohn can be pardoned, I believe, in a way that's going to help Trump. So I think Cohn is going to be out there. He may be looking to see whether Manafort gets a pardon, but I think Cohn is going to be out there. I think he knows an awful lot. He is the lawyer that Trump chose. This is not somebody that Mueller chose. This is who Donald Trump chose to be his attack dog for all of those years, and he knows an awful lot of stuff. And if he says that it was done to perpetrate a crime or fraud, it's not going to be covered by attorney-client privilege. It's going to be an exception to the attorney-client privilege. It's going to be as admissible in court as if he'd conspired with anybody else.
Okay, well, the Democrat leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, issued a warning to the president not to dangle the possibility of pardons when he was addressing that rally in West Virginia. This is what he said.
I understand the president's on his way to a rally. He better not talk about pardons for Michael Cohen or Paul Manafort tonight or any time in the future.
Sean, the president seems to be being intimidated by crying Chuck Schumer. Is he going to go down this road of pardons? Is all now that he's sort of been put on notice, he's going to walk away from it?
Who knows what's going to happen
politically, though?
in the pardoning process? It's just idle speculation. But Chuck Schumer's kind of a nobody right now, and he's not terribly important. He's probably not going to gain the Senate. The Republicans are probably going to gain strength in the Senate. But let's talk about the political realities. This really isn't important for most Americans.
Well, but
now, nobody's ever been put in jail for a corporate donation and a federal election. It's usually a civil fine 98% of the time. Very few people have ever had a criminal prosecution against them. Every lawyer here knows this.
I don't know why
we're even talking about it, but we're talking about it because it raises the level of hysteria, and it gets the hard left really excited, but they're going to be really disappointed.
Dave?
That was a really good job of deflecting the question. Look, the reality... Wait, it's not just Chuck Schumer, John. It's Republicans. It's overwhelming consensus in both houses of Congress. Besides the diehard extremist Trump fans in Congress and the House particularly, overwhelmingly, at least in the Senate, moderate, common sense, level-headed, pragmatic senators who are Republicans do not want the president to pardon his supporters who are being investigated or have committed criminal wrongdoing. Bottom line, and that potentially could be grounds for impeachment by both Democrats and Republicans if he starts pardoning all of these folks.
Rita, there is questions about the presidential authority here when it comes to the pardon power. Is it absolute? Can he do it whenever he wants? And can he be held accountable for that by Congress through impeachment or through other methods?
The pardon power, John, is pretty broad with respect to the president. And as we've seen him exercise it to date, he doesn't go through the typical process. The procedures aren't followed. He just kind of decides on his own. He wakes up in the morning, he does a tweet, and then someone is pardoned. I agree with Dave on this point, though. He is getting into really, really, precarious territory if he starts to pardon people like Paul Manafort, and particularly Michael Cohen, given what Michael Cohen said in court today. So I don't think we're going to see a pardon. Paul Manafort may have that as a strategy, but we don't know. The charges to the convictions today and the looming trial in September may be enough to cause Paul Manafort to rethink his strategy and to think about trying to, work some kind of deal with the prosecutors. If he does, that whole trial in September may go away. The prosecutors may recommend a lighter sentence for the convictions today. We know that Michael Cohen, even though there's not a cooperation agreement in the plea that was entered today, he still has an opportunity to try to work a deal with the prosecutors so that he can also get, less time than 4 or 5 years. Look, this is a guy with young kids and a family. He doesn't want to go to jail for 4 or 5 years. He's already made it clear that he's no longer team Trump. He's Team Cohen and his family. So if he can get the sentences reduced to 2 years or maybe even 12 months, we should expect him to try to do everything in his possible to protect his family and to stay out of jail.
No one wants to go to jail for 4 years, I think is pretty safe to say. I'd like you all to stay with us because we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll have a lot more on Donald Trump's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day.